They always say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and I think I was guilty of that when I first seen this radio. If you don't know what this is, it is the Jumper T20S. Now, this radio has had a bit of a strange release in the sense of there was an initial basic T20 that has been replaced by another T20 with Hall effect gimbals, and then you have the T20S like you see here. The T20 and T20S are now very similar. There are two different versions based on the gimbal, but the overall features, capabilities and looks of the radios are basically the same. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of the T20S. I'm going to walk you through some of its features and capabilities. We're going to tear it down, take a look at the build quality. We're going to compare it to some of the radios as well. And then at the very end, I'm going to share with you my thoughts. Now, just before we get on with this, I just want to say if you do find this video useful, please do consider giving it a like. If you'd like to subscribe, there is a link below. And also, if you'd like to support the channel, there is also a link there to my Patreon as well. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Anyway, let's get on with it and let's take a look at what you get with this radio first of all. So, I'm going to do a quick unboxing. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I am going to do one for people who may not have seen one of these radios before. So when you get it, it comes in this box. The model I've got is the T20S edition. That is the one with the pots on the gimbals. They are Alps pots, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on. Now, when you go inside, you'll find you get some stickers that go on the radio buttons. We'll talk about them again a bit more later on. We've got a nice little printed user manual, which actually is really nice to see. You don't often get that with radios these days. We have a lanyard included. Very nice. We'll take a look at that in a minute. We've got a USB-C cable, and then the radio itself in the box at the bottom, and that really is pretty much it. Okay, so to walk you around the handset, now this is the S edition, which means it comes with full-size gimbals, but they are potentiometer or pot gimbals, and they are fitted with Alps pots. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. The radio is an Edge TX based radio, and it comes with a 1.3-inch OLED display. With regards to the radio system, this one is the Express LRS edition, 2.4 gigahertz, and it has a 1 watt module built in as standard. Looking at the controls and switches on the front, we've got two traditional pots down here. We have two throttle assisted channels, 6 custom buttons. These are programmable within Edge TX, and you can see that they're blank at the moment, and that's what these little stickers are for. You can program them in the software and then put the sticker on relevant for the function you've chosen. We've got a metal roller wheel down here for controlling the Edge TX software, and we've got our usual buttons. So we've got menu, forward, back, as well as back out of the menu. We've got some adjustments here for our gimbals. So we've got our trims. On the top, we've got 2 3-position switches on the front, 2 2-position switches on the top corners. And then if I flip the radio around to the back, you can see we've got 2 pots on the back again, and we've got 2 latching buttons here. On the back of the radio, you'll notice that there is no module bay. There is a heat sink though for that built-in Express LRS module, but you can fit a module bay adapter onto this, and under this little rubber cover here, if I just try and get it open, there you can see we've got an XT30 power output for connecting to the external module bay. That is 7.4 volts, 1.5 amps, and then we've got an I/O port there for the protocol. Now, you can fit an external module bay, or you can fit a 4-in-1 module, and Jumper actually make one, and I have one here, and we'll look at that a bit more later on as well. On the top, you can see we do have a trainer port as well as a USB-C port, and then on the back, we have our battery bay door as well as some rubber grips on the side, and under these grips, I believe you can actually adjust the gimbals. Actually, you get into this from this side, not the back. And under here, you can see we've got the screw holes for the radio. Actually, it doesn't look like there's adjustments there for the gimbals. I actually think they're on the front here under those screws. I'll look into that a bit more. I can see some screws through there, but I'm not sure you put a driver in. So actually, that's where you get into the radio. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is adjustment for the gimbals on the front. On the top and bottom of the gimbal, you've got these little metal plates, and then there's one either side of the gimbal stick itself. Now, if you look on this side, I've actually taken them off. You do have travel adjustments for the vertical option in here, but there's nothing under the horizontal there as far as I can tell. These plates are just flashing pieces, finishing pieces, just to add a bit of bling. These top ones, though, do allow you to adjust the travel. However, the rest of the adjustments you're going to need to do from inside the radio. Does look like there's a bit of a gap when you take those back covers off, but you may need to take it apart to get to all of the options. Removing the battery bay door, in here you'll find an adapter that allows you to put in some cells. Now officially this is designed to take 21-700s, you fit 2 of them, but you can also fit 18-650s in here. There's enough length on the springs either side to do it. We then just got a plug in that plugs into the radio down in that corner under there. You could use a LiPo if you wanted to instead of this, but they do include this as standard, but there are no batteries included with the radio. Now, just to demo that you can actually put 18-650s in here, we've got 2 here. Now, these are the flat tops. Now, these actually go in a little bit loose, but you can actually bend out the springs a little bit if you wanted to use them. We're going to pop that one forward, pop that one forward as well. And then we'll be able to fit these in. Button top ones should go in no problem at all. There we go. That one's in. Then just make sure we get the polarity right. That one's in there. Then we need to just pop the connector in, making sure that we obviously have it the right way round. Obviously, the benefit to using 21-700s is going to be the larger capacity. You're going to get more battery life, but you shouldn't suffer too much just using 18-650s. There we go. Now in. So we can now slide the cover on. And all done. One last thing I just want to mention on this is the antenna. Now it is fully articulated. You can move it forward and back. You can also rotate it vertically as well, so you can adjust it to get the perfect position for your setup. Now, just to power the radio up, I'll just show you what the display looks like. Press and hold. You can see we've got a full color LED button in the center, just like on a couple of the other Edge TX radios. So it goes blue to tell you it's firing up, and then green to give us a ready to go status. And then you can see on the front there that we've got the usual homepage for Edge TX. Now, you have all of the usual functionality with regards to that here. So for instance, if I go down, I can press the model select and I can scroll through each of the windows there on the buttons. The display is actually really, really nice. Easy to see, no issues at all. It's not the largest display in the world, but personally, that's not a problem. And you can easily scroll through. Then we can go back. And then I'm assuming if we press and hold, we go into tools. And as I've said, this is the Express LRS edition. So we can go there in, and you can see the Express LRS options. You can go down to TX power, set that up to 1 watt, set the dynamic power if you want to, which I will from there. Now, just to show you that display in a bit more detail, it really is very, very nice. I've been looking at it now for a few minutes and it just looks perfect. It's nice and bright, easy to see. I'm looking at it here under quite bright lighting in the workshop and I've got no problem seeing it at all. As I've said, not the biggest display in the world. However, you're certainly not going to have too many problems being able to see what is being shown on there other than with its size. Now, with regards to comparing this radio to others, a lot of people have asked me about it compared to, say, the Pocket from Radio Master. However, I don't feel that this radio is in that class. The Pocket is more of a gamepad style controller, smaller gimbals, smaller than the likes of the Zorro, and in my opinion, the T20 is in the medium-sized radio category, like the Boxer. These two are far more similar. They have full-size gimbals, they are full-width radios as such, and they have a lot more features and capabilities, and I think the Pocket isn't in this class, and whilst you could easily compare these two, they are very, very different radios, and in my opinion, you want to be looking at this compared to the Boxer. So, putting these two side by side, now you can see first of all that the T20 is wider, but it isn't as tall. They do though have very similar functionality. Full-size gimbals. We've got programmable buttons down here and here. We've got 3 position switches, which are these 2 here, and 2 position switches. And whilst they're in different places, you do have that similar level of functionality. You have 2 pots, and actually there's a bit more with regards to pots on this radio because you do have the little extra ones down here. We then have the additional ones on the corners, and we have those buttons up there too. Overall, the T20 has a few more switches and buttons, but they're just in different places. Obviously, there's differences with the screens because we've got that OLED compared to that LCD. It's much smaller, but this is much easier to see in bright conditions. And overall, they are very similar with regards to their overall functionality in a portable package. Now, if I just slide these two across and bring in the pocket, you can see that it's a very different radio. We don't have all of the switches and buttons. You do have these DJI style ones on the top, but it's just not the same radio. This, in my opinion, is a great starter radio. It's a great second, spare or bench radio if you want to be able to use the SIM. You can absolutely use it on a daily basis, but for me, I do like something a bit bigger, whereas these two are absolutely full-time radios. You could live with these no problem at all. Yes, you are giving up some functionality compared to, say, a TX16, but overall, for most people, it'll have everything you want. So the next thing we're going to do, I think, is tear the radio down, and then we'll come on to these gimbals. So I've taken the grips off the sides. As I've said, to get them, you just want to lift them up from the sides here and here. I used a plastic pry tool to do it, and I've removed the battery. So looking at it, there's 2 screws down here. There's 2 at the top here, and then there's 2 in each corner here. So that gives 6 in total. So what I'll do is I'll undo them, and then we'll see how we get on. Now, from the looks of it, there are 2 more screws up here by the antenna that I missed the first time looking around the radio, so we need to get these out. Then I have loosened the nuts on the corners around those 2 switches, and that now, as you see, is just released that plastic piece for the antenna. Let's just get them out. Now, I've loosened these 2 nuts on the corners here, so hopefully this will mean the shell will come apart, which it is. And then if I carefully look in, yeah, there are wires going from the front to the back. So if I just lift it up so you guys can see, we've got a couple of harnesses that are going from one board to the other. There's a harness that looks like it goes to a bottom board down here. That looks a tight one. So we want to get that one first. So that is, I'm going to carefully undo him. There we go. That allows us to open it up. So that's that one you can see down there. And then we've got 2 more. We've got one from a board here. Let me just come forward so you can see it. So that one there goes to there, and then there to there. So they actually sort of cross. What we'll do is carefully pop these 2 off. One. There we go. So then we've just got the 2 here on the corners that go to the wheels and the buttons on the back. We just want to release them as well. And finally, we then have our antenna cable that goes to the Express LRS module on the back. The Express LRS module actually isn't in the middle of the radio here. It's on the back, bolted to that heatsink. That's a UFL. So we want to very carefully pop him off, and then we can withdraw the back shell. Okay, now we'll start looking at the back shell because there's quite a lot going on in here anyway. So we've got our pots and buttons on each corner. So you can see there, we've got the pots, and then we've got the push buttons. There are 2 screws, which is also glued down into bosses there. That looks to be for handles that you can mount on the back. That looks nice and solid, which is nice to see. We've got our cable connections going to a board here. That goes to that XT30 as well as that IO port for an external module. And then we've got our wiring harness that goes over to what is our Express LRS module that is mounted on the back, and that's mounted directly to this heatsink. There's no fan in this radio for cooling. It's all passive, done with that heatsink on the back. You see, it's quite a large heatsink as well, actually, so there should be no problems at all keeping that cool. We've got the UFL antenna output there. There is a button on it, actually. Won't be for binding. It'll be the usual one you find on Express LRS stuff. And then if we just lift the sticker, just take a look. There we can see our chipsets. And what I'll actually do is we'll get that under the microscope in a minute so you can take a closer look. Moving over to the radio side of things, you can see we've got our main board in the middle with our ARM chipset. And there's a lot of little individual boards in here. So you've got a speaker. We've got a board down this side here, which is our power input with our battery connection. We've got another board over here for the roller wheel as well as the battery. There's a board at the bottom here for those buttons, as I showed you earlier, as well as those additional throttles. And then there's another board at the top here where a lot of stuff comes in and out too, which looks like a lot of voltage regulation. Actually, you can see there's definitely a regulator there, definitely a regulator there. And then you've got the circuitry below that. And this board is attached to this board with what looks to be a pin connector underneath down there. You can just see it in, and then that's screwed in either side. We've then obviously got our switches on the corners, that one there and that one there. Then that one and that one. No heat shrink on the connections. Bit of a shame. Would have been nice to see. And then finally, we've got our gimbals with our connections that go down to the board there. Now, these gimbals are the S ones, as I've said, which are the Alps pots. You can see that there are potentiometers on these there. Now, if I zoom in, you can see them a little bit better. You've got the pot on each axis, and then you've got wiring that goes through. What they've actually done for this one here is the wiring from that pot goes through the gap in the middle and actually comes out the middle of that pot, goes onto the same PCB as that pot, and then the wiring for that goes down to the main board there, and it's exactly the same over there on the other side. Now, these are plastic gimbals, but they do have metal pieces. If we look at them on the other side in a minute, you'll see that there are bits of metal all over the gimbal, but the main body of the gimbal is actually plastic, and then it's got metal pieces here and there, but it isn't a full CNC gimbal like you may have seen on other radios. Now, you can see this silver piece here. This isn't actually metal. It's silver-coated plastic. You can see it down there. Just moving the gimbal around, you can see the parts move. In here, there's no real metal parts. The metal bits are what you see on the other side. I'll talk a bit more about how the gimbals feel later on when I sort of talk about the ergonomics of the radio compared to others and the overall feel of the sticks as well. Now, just looking around inside at the build quality, I've got no complaints. Yes, there are a lot of boards, which is going to have an effect on the BOM, but overall, everything looks tidy. I do know there was some talk about these switches catching the other switch on the corner, but mine looks fine. I would have liked to have seen some heat shrink tubing on these switches just to offer a bit more protection. And I'm always a bit concerned when I see wires this thin on things like gimbals. But overall, the quality looks fine. The soldering looks tidy, and I've got nothing here that I can really complain about. Now, one last thing I just want to quickly take a look at is the antenna. Now, I've been trying to take it apart. There is a screw there, but this piece in the middle doesn't want to come apart. However, I have prized this open enough to see inside, and there is what looks to be a dipole in there. There is an element going to the left and an element going to the right, and that attaches to a small PCB. You can see that down in there. I'm not going to rip it apart anymore, but I did have some questions on this, and there were just people wondering if it was just a single element going one way or how it was actually set up. But there, I just get it open again. There you can see the elements go either way. It looks just to be wire attached to the PCB. Now, at this point, I intended to show you the PCBs under the microscope, but unfortunately, there was a problem with that recording and it didn't work. Now, rather than do it again, I've actually looked at everything closely, and the reality is I can find zero issues. The opinion I have from the build quality internally on this radio is that it is absolutely perfect. There was no tombstoning. All of the soldering on the components looks really good. The PCB quality looks tidy. I literally could find zero fault. I would love to have showed it to you, but I don't want to tear this down again right now to do it. I may do it in a separate video in the future, but what I'll say instead is there's nothing to worry about with regards to the build quality, even when we get in looking close under the microscope at the very smallest of components. Now, one final thing I want to talk about on this radio before I start jumping into my thoughts is the gimbals, and can you replace them with things such as CNC gimbals from other manufacturers? Now, initially, it appeared to be the case that things like the AG01s would not fit this radio, and that is because the PCB actually hangs over and causes a little bit of an obstruction. However, a user on my Discord has been able to do this. They've done a modification where they need to remove some of the material on the side of the gimbal, and it has allowed them to install AG01s in this radio. So the situation with that is they are not plug and play. There is modification needed, but it is possible if you're keen. And if you are interested, there will be a link to my Discord server in the description where you can hop over and find out more. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the T20S, having spent some time with it, we'll first of all talk about the fit and finish and stuff, and then I'll come back and give you my opinion. Okay, so to start with the fit, feel and finish. Now, the radio feels nice and solid. The plastics are actually really quite good. They're this blue colour. It's not grey, it's more blue, but there's no feel of cheapness. It feels nice and solid. Buttons do feel a little bit cheap here and there, if I'm honest with you. Switches are okay. But these there's a bit of a nasty click to them. Trims feel okay. And it is the same with the pots as well. They don't feel the greatest on the corner. And with regards to these buttons, these momentary ones up here, I don't find them very comfortable. The way they are, let me just flip the radio around, is they pivot from the inside. So if I show you, you can't push down in that top area there. They pivot down like that. And what I find is there's not enough room between that button and this shoulder. And when I'm here, it doesn't feel comfortable to me. I'm having to sort of push into that plastic to get to it. I think there's too much going on. They've tried to cram in rotary and buttons. I would have preferred two bigger buttons here rather than having the rotary pots and the buttons. Absolutely usable, but just to me, don't feel the most comfortable. These down here, the pots down here feel okay. Not the greatest, not the worst. Plastic on the controls feels a bit cheap. That's about the only thing I would say that feels cheap. And the power button itself feels good as well. Next, moving on to the gimbals. Now, there's a bit to talk about here. These are plastic gimbals. These are the pots, which I'll talk about more later, but they are predominantly plastic. Whilst there are metal parts, most of that metal work is for bling, and the main functional parts of the gimbal are plastic, other than the stick ends. Now, smoothness-wise, they feel actually okay. No complaints at all. Although they are not the most solid gimbals, there is flex, and that is because they are plastic. They are not terrible, though. What I would say is they are on par with the gimbals on the Mambo originally, but they're not as good as, say, the V4s from other manufacturers. Now, the stick ends are metal. They are adjustable, but they do have this grub screw in the middle, which means you do have to bring a tool with you to adjust them. You can unscrew them, but the grub screw is there to hold it tight. And actually, I adjusted this one just now, and it's come loose again. It is a bit frustrating that you have to have a tool with you to do the adjustments. I prefer the stick ends that are two-part, so you lock the top against the bottom, and that way you can easily adjust them whilst out in the field. Overall, the quality of the radio does feel decent. There's no major complaints of cheapness here. There's just little bits, I think, that let it down. This plastic area here does look a little bit cheap, but it is certainly a fingerprint magnet. Mine also has a little bit of a crack in there. That's how it came. It might be a scratch. I can't quite see. It might actually just be a scratch, but it was there when I opened the radio. But other than that, it feels quite good. The grips on the side are not the softest. It is a rubber, but it's really hard. But the ergonomics with the fingers around the back is good. Overall, no major complaints, just a few little things here and there. Now, before I share with you my thoughts, I just want to talk a bit more about the gimbal sensors on the radios. So we have two versions, the T20, which is a Hall effect sensor, and the T20S, like I've got here, which use ALPS potentiometers. People always assume potentiometers are a cheaper alternative to Hall sensors, but the reality is that is not the case. Hall sensors have come on massively over the last few years. However, they are still very susceptible to temperature drifting. If you calibrate them in one temperature and it moves to the extreme, you will have problems. And whilst a Hall sensor is very, very reliable, because there is basically zero mechanical moving parts other than the gimbal itself, that isn't to say Hall sensors are the be-all and end-all, and some people still prefer pots or potentiometers. Some people feel they give them a more linear feel, and some people feel that it's just better for their scenario, especially in wide temperature varying environments. Yes, It is more expensive to have the Alps version. The Alps pots are a decent quality pot. I'm not going to say they're the best in the world, or they're certainly not the worst in the world, but they are a sensor that does offer good reliability. And as a result of that, no one should be afraid about buying the potentiometer version if they want it, but I wouldn't run out and choose that as an absolute must unless you have a very specific reason. Really, there isn't a lot of downsides to the pots other than potential longevity over a very long period of time. However, the benefits are less temperature drift and less issues that you can get with Hall sensors. So, my thoughts on the T20S. Now, I actually think this is a very nice radio, and there's a lot of nice features about this. I like the antenna setup, the fact that it is articulating. You can move it forward, back, and rotate it. I do like the OLED screen. I really like how bright it is. It's not the biggest in the world, but that's fine for me. And I also do like the location of these buttons down the bottom. They're much better than what you get on the Boxer. You do have the ones along the bottom on the Boxer, but they're really hard to feel when you're not looking at the handset. Whereas on this, they are much higher, they're more raised, and they are easier to get to. The ergonomics of the radio, as I've said, are okay, but that top area isn't the best, and I'll talk about that a bit more when we come into the negatives. What's also quite nice on this is that there's only one USB port, which means you can charge and data on that port as well. It just saves a little bit of confusion like you do see on some of the other radios where there are two ports. You've got one for data and one for the battery. And overall, I think Jumper have done a good job here. The downsides to this radio for me are, number one, there should be a module bay included in the package of standard. It is not great that you have to buy that as an accessory. I think they should have just tossed that extra in for what it would have actually cost. The gimbals are not the best. They're certainly not the worst. And I do think there's quite a bit of nonsense on this in the sense of there's bling around the gimbals and this metalwork around the adjustment areas. I think it's just unnecessary. It would have been far better for the radio to be far simpler. It's annoying that you have to remove this little plate to adjust the end stops if you want to do that. You still have to go in the back though if you really do want to do more fine adjustments on the rest of the gimbal movement. You've got this black bit down the bottom with some of the silver metal screws. Whilst it all looks nice, it's just, for me, unnecessary bling, and I would have preferred more done on the quality of the gimbals. They are fully plastic with some little metal parts. It would have been great if they would have been as solid as even the plastic V4s on the Radiomasters. As I've said, they're not quite up there with them. They're not terrible. I'd put them in the ballpark of something like the Mambo gimbals or the Mambo Pro gimbals. So they're certainly not bad. They're certainly not usable. They're just not quite up there with some of the best others. Though you can install the AGO ones from Radiomaster if you're willing to do some mods, but obviously that would affect the warranty on your radio. Overall, I don't think they've done anything terrible here. There's just a few little things I would have preferred better. Again, like the switches on the top, I think they've done too much there, having the button and the rotary potentiometer. It would have been better just to have, I think, one button on one side and one pot on the other, rather than trying to squeeze both into the same area because there's just too little space there for them. In the end, I think it is a very viable option compared to, say, the Boxer from Radiomaster, and it really does then come down to what you want from a radio. Whether you want the radio to be from Jumper or Radiomaster, whether you want something like this fully articulating antenna, and whether the switch layout and the button layout more suits your kind of flying. This is definitely going to be better for, say, more fixed wing pilots, in my opinion, but it certainly will be a nice option for FPV pilots as well. And I think it definitely is bringing the fight to the likes of the Boxer. And really, if you've got a decision to be made on what size radio you want to go with, if you're in the medium category, it is absolutely worth thinking about. Now, price-wise, this radio comes in at about $120 for the standard T20 or $130 for the T20S. Now, there is also a 915/886 or the 2.4 gig Express LRS version available as well, depending on what setup you want to choose. It is also worth noting, though, when ordering the standard T20, make sure you're going for the one which has this antenna. There is an earlier version with a standard Omni-looking antenna that you may find on the likes of AliExpress. That is that original version, as I understand it. The current version is this one, which has the T antenna, which is fully articulating, and that's the one you want to go for, regardless of the radio system that you choose. So that is it from me on this one. I really do hope you have found it interesting. I really love to know what you think about this radio. If there's any questions, any comments, do put them down below. As I've said, there is a link to my Discord there if you're interested in finding out more about that AG01 upgrade. Also, if you have found it interesting, please do give the video a like. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Finally, I just want to say, if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking out the link to my Patreon. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. I would not be able to keep making content on this channel without their support. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking it out. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.